Good morning, everyone. This is David Rott with the Tessman Company General Manager. Welcome, everyone, to our webinar today on overseeding. Tessman would like to introduce our expert today, Margaret Childers. Margaret is the Research and Product Development Manager for Jacklin Seed. She received her Bachelor of Science degree in Resource Recreation and Tourism from the University of Idaho in 1997 and did her master's work in plant breeding at Iowa State University. She is currently one of Jacklin's top researchers in cool and warm season turf grasses. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please type them in the question section and we will get to them after the presentation. Now, on to the webinar. Margaret.
Okay, thank you. And thanks for inviting me to present for you today. I'm excited to be here. And I'll just get right into it. So we're going to talk about overseeding and spring renovation. And the first thing is just go over what are the goals with what you're trying to do in the spring. And it might depend on what your role is as a turf manager. So in the spring, a sports turf manager is going to need to fill in the bare spots from the fall playing season and make any corrections from the winter damage. You want to improve the density of the grass. And to do that, you want something that's going to establish quickly so you can get fields ready for spring play, because a lot of sports turf managers, especially I know around here, we've got almost nonstop play on the fields with soccer in spring and fall, baseball in the summer. It just is kind of a nonstop thing. And then of course, player safety is the key, which is why it's important to make sure you've got a nice, full, dense turf grass for them to play on. The homeowners are wanting to do some of the same things. They probably have bare spots in the lawn from shade, winter kill, sometimes diseases or insects, and then especially pets. I know that's one of my biggest problems is the dog. And then another option is they want to look at incorporating improved varieties without doing a full renovation. And then for golf course superintendents, they're also looking at filling in bare spots, improving the density of the grass. And on greens, a lot of the northern golf courses are going to have Poa annua on the greens. And I know that's a common problem around here. So they're looking at trying to increase the density and population of the bent grasses and bringing in improved varieties, especially to compete with the Poa. So there's something I wanted to go over. We're going to look at do an actual renovation that we worked with a sports field here in Spokane, Washington. So I don't know if any of you watched Jimmy Kimmel. If you were following the basketball tournament this past season for March Madness, and if you watched Jimmy Kimmel, you might know that he was kind of making fun of Gonzaga University, claiming that it didn't really exist. So I'm here as a witness to say that it does exist, and it also has a baseball field. So we actually were working with the Gonzaga baseball field manager to help do a spring renovation. So this is a true story about a real university in Spokane, and the field manager, Tommy, had a Poa annua problem on his field. So in the fall, I think of 2016, he decided that it was time to renovate and get the field back to a bluegrass and perennial ryegrass stand. So there's Tommy, the real manager of the sports field at the real university called Gonzaga. So what Tommy was trying to accomplish, he wanted to balance early spring play with winter survival. So in Spokane, we can have some interesting winters. Sometimes we'll have a winter that's more like a Seattle climate with rain and temperatures that are more just hovering around the freezing point. And then other winters, like this past winter, we might have a whole ton of snow and much colder temperatures. In fact, I think we got 2 or 3 feet of snow just in January and February in our neck of the woods. So winter kill is a problem for perennial ryegrass sometimes around here. But Tommy wanted to get more perennial ryegrass on the baseball field because he felt that it would be better for the early spring play on the field. The bluegrass had slowly become a mix. The original bluegrass on the field had become a mix of poa, bluegrass, and ryegrass. And the goal is to increase the ryegrass, especially in the infield, and try to get rid of the poa annua. So why did he want to increase the ryegrass? Well, and a lot of you might be familiar with this. The ryegrass actually is the first variety or the first species that you'll see to green up in the spring. So this is a picture I took in Spokane at another actual real college called Spokane Community College. And the ryegrass, this was 2 weeks ago on April 2nd. And you can see that there are definitely some plots that are divided out by the orange paint that are greener than other plots. And I'll get to that in just a second. But another reason that they wanted to do the ryegrass is Tommy wanted to get the field established quickly. And the ryegrass will germinate in 3 to 4 days and could be ready for use faster than a bluegrass field. And the ryegrass will mix well with other grasses. The existing bluegrass that was there, he knew the ryegrass would blend in with that and it would look good and be a nice uniform field. And the ryegrass is also extremely traffic tolerant, and in a lot of traffic tests we did around here, the ryegrasses were the ones that survived over the full season with a wear being applied several times a week with a Brinkman traffic machine. So the ryegrasses generally were the ones that survived the best. And then the ryegrasses also have a close cutting tolerance. So they can be kept high for, a recreational field, for soccer, for the city parks, or it can be mown short at 1/2 inch for more of a high level sports field. So when you look at this, the ryegrass in this picture are those center plots with the tall fescue on the right that still hasn't greened up, and then the bluegrass on the left. So this is why Tommy wanted to try to get more ryegrass into his baseball field. They start play in March here. This year in March, we still had snow on the ground. So I don't know what Tommy did this year, but March is a pretty tough month to be playing baseball in Spokane. And I know that he was considering a fall renovation, but with the ryegrass, he really wanted to make sure he got it fully established and a mature stand before going into the winter. So his biggest concern was to have a nice field ready to play on in the spring of 2018. And so he worried about planting in the fall and getting potentially some winter kill and not having a field ready to go. So that was why he ended up doing a spring renovation in May, right after the baseball season ended. So on May 23rd in 2017, I think this was probably the day after they played their last baseball game, Tommy prepped the sand field. They did a phrase mowing, and with the phrase mowing, they were able to remove the thatch and organic matter. And the phrase mowing is actually a great way to get rid of your poa annua seed bank also. And the poa that doesn't have a very good root system can also be removed that way. But the crowns of the hardier species like the bluegrass and the ryegrass will stay intact. And then Tommy drill seeded 100% ryegrass into the infield using a seeding rate of 6 pounds per 1,000 square feet. And then he seeded the bluegrass and a ryegrass mix. And I don't know the exact ratio he was using on that, but I think he was using a little higher ryegrass ratio, probably like a closer to a 70% ryegrass, just because there was a lot more bluegrass in the outfield that was already there, and he was just trying to fill it in. So here was the result. We were out there 34 days after his seeding, and you can see that the grass is pretty well established already. And this was after the drill seeding in 2 directions. You can kind of see still where the drill seeded rows are, but it's looking really good. Unfortunately, I didn't get in touch with Tommy before this presentation to see how the field has held up. I know last fall, I talked to the sales rep who worked with him on the grass, and he said that it had worked great, and Tommy was pretty pleased. So I am curious to find out how it went through the winter of this past winter. That was pretty rough. Not as rough as I think you guys had in the Midwest. I think we dipped down to just a little below 0. So I'm sure you probably think we have it easy out here. But I will see if I can find out, and then I can follow up with Lauren maybe. I don't know if she can pass that along to everybody else. And Gonzaga also did their soccer fields with the same ryegrass and bluegrass, their practice fields, so that they could get those in better shape too. So that's going over a sports field renovation. Some other tips for spring renovation and overseeding. It's important to make sure you can expose some dirt and remove the thatch just to improve the establishment of the new seed. This can be done by power raking or verticutting, whatever equipment you can get to try to expose a little dirt. For sports fields, aerating is also a key to help improve the compaction that's going to happen and get the field ready for the new seed. See, you can seed with a drop spreader or a rotary spreader. It's not, there's really no magical way to do it. The main thing is after the seeding is done, you want to make sure to top dress or drag or roll the seed into the soil to get the contact. And then it's important to treat it like a new seeding. Make sure you're using starter fertilizer and keep it moist and watered. And it's fine to continue normal mowing. As long as you're not removing the clippings, you don't have to worry about removing seed and taking it off. And so mowing will help maintain the grass at a shorter height to allow the new seedlings to get exposure to the sun and have some room to grow in. So these pictures were taken at Downriver Golf Course, which I believe is the oldest golf course in Spokane. And they were trying to improve the population of bent grass on their greens and add some of our new bent grass varieties in to get a little more aggressive bent grass base. Okay, so another good way to incorporate the seed is slice seeding. And this was done on a sports field in West Virginia in the spring of last year. So I believe what they did was kill off the original grass, probably a mix of POA and whatever was there before. And they just applied a glyphosate or probably a glyphosate to kill off the top grass and then just slice seed right into that. And you can see only, 3 or 4 weeks later, in June, it's looking really good and ready for play just about. Okay, the next thing I wanted to go over is seeding rates. So this is often something that we get asked about. Last year, I got a phone call from a sports field in Spokane. I know I'm going to talk about Spokane a lot because it's right next door to where I live, and it's a real place with real college. You guys need to watch Jimmy Kimmel if you haven't seen that spot yet, and you'll know what I'm talking about. So in Spokane, they called me to say that their overseeding didn't seem to be working. So they were going out, gosh, I think he was going out every couple weeks with only about 1 pound per 1,000 square feet of perennial ryegrass, and wasn't seeing much of a difference in the population of the grass. And this was during the playing season, trying to increase the density of the grass and just try to maintain the field through the season. And this is a park that gets constant, nonstop soccer play. And they do a lot of, to maintain their fields, they shift the field maybe 10 feet either way, just to try to change the wear pattern on the field. But they were trying to get more ryegrass into the mix. So what I suggested is, if you can't take the field out of play and you're going to seed during the playing season, it's a much better option to seed every 6 weeks with a much higher seeding rate. And you can use a mix of bluegrass and ryegrass, but it's better to have a higher proportion of the ryegrass in that mix because you want it to germinate and establish quickly. And then you can allow the athletes to incorporate the seed by playing on the field. So when you go out with the low seeding rate on a more frequent basis, you really are trying to, what you're trying to do is do the seedling lottery. And the more seedlings that are out there competing with the existing grass and trying to compete against the traffic of the players, the more seedlings that are out there, the more that will survive. So the higher seeding rate seems to be more effective in getting that done. The Kentucky bluegrass needs more time to establish than the ryegrass. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But ideally, if you're going to be seeding with more bluegrass, you should have this field taken out of play for 6 to 8 weeks. So fall or spring is often the best time for bluegrass. And if there's any time where the field can be rested, that's the time to seed it. And then go in with the ryegrass in the summer and during the playing season. So on golf greens, Doug Breedy and Christian Baldwin, who were our research scientists here at Jacklin Seed, they did some work, and then also based on some research at Rutgers, the bent grass will germinate well even in the heat of the summer, and it's more competitive with the POA at that time of the year. So if you go in to overseed your greens in the spring or the fall, that's when the POA annua is growing vigorously and is at its happiest. So what they found at Rutgers is that if you come back and seed your bent grasses in the summer, say mid-June to mid-August, when the POA annua is really struggling, the bent grass will actually be more competitive and germinate and grow in better. The seeding rate is also better to be a little higher. So 2 to 4 pounds per 1,000 square feet is what Dr. Breedy found when he did his research. And I think he actually recommends more on the higher end of that seeding rate. And then if you want to interseed in 2 directions, 1 to 2 times a year. So come in maybe in June and come back again in August, just to get that population of seed and bent grass up. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little more now about some of our mixes that make a good option for overseeding, establishing new fields in the springtime or in the fall. And it kind of depends on the mix on when the best time to establish it is and what situation it might work for. So our Athletic Pro is a 50-50 mix of bluegrass and perennial ryegrass. And the mix of bluegrass has, it kind of depends on what's available at the time, but generally it's going to have 2 or 3 of the grasses listed here: Blue Chip Plus, Jackpot, Everest, Liberator, or New Blue Plus. And Liberator is and Everest are our more elite midnight type varieties with nice dark color. They're very summer tolerant to the heat, so they perform well in the middle of the summer. Blue Chip Plus also does well in the summer, but it has a little earlier spring green up than the Everest and the Liberator. And Jackpot and New Blue Plus are also earlier season green up varieties. Jacklin perennial ryegrasses, Accent, Caddyshack 2, Top Gun 2, those are all good, nice dark color, blend well with the bluegrass, great performing perennial ryegrasses. And later I'll talk about, you'll see that those were, some of those varieties were actually used on the World Cup fields in Russia last summer. The Heisman mix is a lower ratio of ryegrass, has 85% bluegrass and 15% perennial ryegrass. And the bluegrasses are a little more elite varieties: Award, Beyond, Everest, and Jackpot. And Jackpot, again, is kind of a newer variety that we're offering that's a early spring green up, and it's quite aggressive. So it's a good variety for sports fields, and it's also quicker to establish. So it's going to be the first bluegrass to pop when you seed and help fill in that turf grass. And then also the varieties like Top Gun, similar to the ones in the Athletic Pro mix, are going to be in the Heisman mix. And Overseeder 2 is going to be a 70%, 30% ryegrass mix, 70% bluegrass. It also has our elite varieties like in the Heisman, and a good mix of the ryegrasses also. So what you will not see in any of these mixes is annual ryegrass. And annual ryegrass is a cheap filler that we don't use in any of our mixes. So you'll never see it in a Jacklin mix or blend. It's not going to persist. If you plant it, it's going to die by the next season or thin out. So it's something we'll never use. So what's in a mix? So the mixes we just talked about, 50-50, 70-30, 85-15, those are by weight, not by seed count. And that's an important differentiation because you've all seen the seeds of bluegrasses and ryegrasses and bent grasses probably. They vary in size by a lot. So when you look at a mix that's 70-30%, like Overseeder 2, you're going to have over 1 million seeds per pound for most bluegrasses. Ryegrasses are right around 300,000 seeds per pound, and it does vary by variety. So when you look at by weight, or sorry, by seed count, the 70-30 mix is actually going to be more of a 90-10 mix when you look by seed count. So the Heisman then at 85-15, by seed count, it's actually more of a 5% ryegrass and 95% bluegrass blend. And then the Athletic Pro 2 at 50-50 is actually going to be more like a 20% ryegrass and 80% bluegrass by seed count. So does that mean that your stand ratio after you seed those is going to end up being exactly 80-20, 95-5, or 90-10? Well, it's kind of complicated on how that actually ends up working out in your stand. And it can depend on a lot of factors, but it mostly depends on the seeding date and when and how often you're mowing. So Dr. Breedy did a lot of research on this early on, but the rules don't really change. He found that perennial ryegrass plants have been shown to generate 4 times the shoots, 10 times the leaves, 15 times the roots, and 33 times the overall plant weight compared to bluegrass during the first weeks of establishment. So this actually can be affected by the seeding date. So when you look at the first 6 weeks of establishment for grass, which is the most critical time, when bluegrass was planted, it remained fairly constant no matter the seeding date. So he did tests where he planted the grass every 2 weeks from April through November, planted test plots, and found that the bluegrass produced about 2 shoots per seedling in the first 6 weeks, no matter when it was planted, April through November. On the other hand, the perennial ryegrass produced shoots equal to the bluegrass in the spring and the fall. But in the midsummer, June and July, the ryegrass generated 5 times as many shoots as the Kentucky bluegrass. So when you plant a mix of bluegrass and ryegrass in the middle of the summer, the ryegrass is going to be so much more aggressive in its establishment that it's going to drown out the bluegrass. So that's something to keep in mind when you're planting a mix and you want to make sure that you're getting that bluegrass established. Now, mowing will also affect the balance of the blend. So the ryegrass, is going to pop. It's going to be the first thing you see coming up after you seed. So it's okay to start mowing the ryegrass even when it's still fairly immature, and keep the mowing height down so that the bluegrass has room to establish. So that's always a challenge, is that the bluegrass is trying to compete with the earlier establishing ryegrass in a mix like that. And I know there are some people, I think there was a golf course superintendent out here who would often ask for his mixes in separate bags because he would plant the bluegrass first and then wait about 5 days and then plant the ryegrass. But I don't know if that's actually necessary, but if you think about the timing of your planting, doing a spring and fall planting, and then keeping it mowed while it's establishing, you can guarantee then that more bluegrass is going to come through on that mix. So let's talk about a little more about where these mixes are good and good applications for them. So the 50-50 mix of Athletic Pro 2, this is a good option for overseeding athletic fields if you need to get some seed in there during the playing season, because it has a high proportion of the ryegrass. And it's an excellent choice for a lower budget athletic field, park, playgrounds, low maintenance type of areas, where you're still going to end up with a very high quality turf grass, but with the higher amount of ryegrass in there and kind of the mid to high range bluegrasses. It's going to give you an excellent field, but not going to be as expensive as some of the other mixes. And the Athletic Pro is adapted to a little higher mowing height based on the varieties that are in there. So it does really well at 1.5 to 3 inches. And, you know, if it's going to be in a lower maintenance regimen with, you know, it should be mowed a little higher at 2 inches if it's not going to have as much fertilizer or water. So the Jackpot and the New Blue Plus in that mix offer the early spring green up that I mentioned, and they're aggressive spreaders. So good for recovery on an athletic field. The Heisman mix is a little more of an elite blend. It's got that high proportion of bluegrass. It makes it a good choice for golf course tees, fairways, and higher end sports fields. It has really good ability to recuperate from divots and scuffs. And the elite bluegrasses in the blend are very tolerant of lower mowing heights for golf course tees and fairways, and also for those sports fields that want a lower height of cut. And they do very well under the high summer stress of the high heat of summer. And they have great density and a nice dark genetic color. You really don't have to put as much nitrogen on the Jacklin Bluegrasses to get that nice dark color out of them. And then this mix also has the Jackpot in it, just to add a little extra spring green up in the Bluegrasses. And then the Overseeder 2 is another good option. It's got the good spring, summer, and fall performance. It also has those elite bluegrasses, so it gives it a good ability to recuperate. And it's a good choice for a high-end house or landscapes, but also could be used on golf courses. Okay, and then I wanted to talk about our Scottish Lynx mix. So you probably remember Erin Hills a couple years ago where the US Open was played, and there was some drama about the roughs. And I guess there was a lot of water that year. The Fine Fescues grew a little bit out of control. And I remember there was a video of Kevin Na trying to hit a ball out of the rough, maybe a little over dramatized, but he made a point. And I think Erin Hills went in and cut the fairways wider and cut down some of the rough just to appease some of the golfers. But that was Jacklin Scottish Lynx that they were using in the roughs at the Erin Hills. And our Scottish Lynx mix is a 4-way blend of 25% each hard fescue, sheep fescue, creeping red fescue, and Tweens fescue. And I really like the Scottish Lynx because of its versatility as a blend. It's a low maintenance mix. It can be used for erosion control, does well on low fertility and poor soils. But it's also a good choice for the outer roughs in a golf course if it's maintained in a natural state and can go to seed, and it looks beautiful. So and as I said, you can mow it. You can mow it down short, even down to a 1/2 inch, or you can leave it in a natural lynx look. And it's also got a good shade tolerance. So it's a great choice for home lawns that have a mixed area where they need like a sun and shade type of situation. Just real quick, I know a lot of people say, well, what's the difference? Why do I need 4 different fine fescues in a mix? And there are different attributes that each of them brings to the table. So with the red fescue is actually divided into 2 categories for slender creeping red fescue and strong creeping red fescue. In our Scottish Lynx blend, I think it can change, but primarily I believe we use the strong creeping red fescue for that mix. And that's because it has the stronger rhizome growth than a slender creeping red fescue. Both strong and slender can tolerate close mowing, and they have good shade tolerance. The Chewings fescue, and I used to wonder why Chewings was always capitalized, and then I realized it was named after a person. George Chewings has excellent shade tolerance. I think it is the best of the fescues in shade tolerance. Has good turf density, and it's really a pretty grass. It has a nice dark color to it. And so it's similar to creeping red fescue, but it does not have the rhizomes. The sheep fescue is great for drought tolerance, and it has more of a blue, silvery blue color to it. It's also a shorter plant. If you were to see it in a mature space plant, it's not as tall as the red fescue. And it's often used in an unmown natural type of situation. And then the hard fescue also has good shade tolerance, but like the sheep fescue, it's not as good it doesn't tolerate the close mowing. So when these are all mixed together, it offers a lot of versatility, and that's why they were able to widen the fairways at Erin Hills. They could just go ahead and mow down the area of the rough that they didn't want anymore. And the Scottish Lynx is a good choice for home lawns. There's a lot of high-end homes in the Spokane, Coeur d'Alene area around here where they're looking over the lake on hillsides with ponderosa pines, and it's a good place to put in a Scottish Lynx mix because the homeowner has the option then, for example, on this hillside on the right, they will probably let that grow natural and leave it unmown. This was shortly after it was hydroseeded. And then the lawn on the left, they'll probably go ahead and keep it mowed. But it's a good choice in these kind of situations where you've got the shade and difficult mowing situations. Okay, and I think I'm kind of close to my time. So I'll just try to be quick here so there's time for questions. I just wanted to mention our bluegrass breeding program. Bluegrasses are really what Jacklin Seed is known for. Doug Breedy built up an incredible bluegrass breeding program here at Jacklin Seed. This is an example of what a breeder block of bluegrasses look like. Bluegrasses are apomictic, meaning that they produce seed, but the seed is a clone of the mother plant. So they are typically, the elite varieties 90 to 99% apomictic, meaning all of the offspring, 90% of the offspring are going to be clones of the mother plant, which makes it a great variety for seed production because you really have a stable genetic base for the grass. So when we're selling you Everest or Award, these are varieties that have been around a long time, but they're not going to change and become a different variety. These are very stable. It's a very stable species. So once you get a new variety, it's gonna keep those attributes and remain strong. And so a lot of our bluegrasses, we had an actual official bluegrass blend that was grown for the World Cup soccer fields, at least for, I believe, at least 8 of them, used a Jacklin Seed bluegrass base. It was a sod blend that included Impact, New Glade, and Everest. So the sod was laid in the stadiums, and then as needed, they were overseeding with some of our perennial ryegrasses. CSI Accent 2 Top Gun 2, and Goalkeeper 2. Accent, Top Gun, and I think even Goalkeeper. Those are some varieties that we use in those Heisman and Overseeder 2 and Athletic Pro mixes. So we're almost done. The last thing to look at is how many light bulbs does it take to grow in a Russian stadium. This is in northern Russia, and it takes a lot. So Jacklin Seed is everywhere grass grows, all over the world, Russia, United States, South America, Africa. Donald Trump has Jacklin grass on his golf courses, and now to be outdone by Putin, who had ryegrass and bluegrass from Jacklin Seed on the soccer stadiums in Russia. And Bhutan, a little country that now has its own golf course, also has Jacklin Seed. So that's it. Go Gonzaga. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret.